Hello, everyone. Today is Ash Wednesday. We and so many others, as the psalmist says, look to the hills, asking where our help will come from. The psalmist replies to the question, our help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. We trust in that promise and in the psalmist's response, but we desperately yearn for that help to come and to come quickly. Today, we remember our sisters and brothers who are in Ukraine and who have left Ukraine and who are traveling. Countless persons moving in many directions, fleeing from violence, fleeing from war. It is a too frequent image for us in this world. And today we hold in prayer during this time of reflection all of our sisters and brothers on this earth who are being displaced as we speak, who have been and continue to be victims of violence, victims of war. We stand with all of them, and we say here and now, you are beheld, and that we love you and welcome you. I also want to say that this Ash Wednesday is perhaps a little different than most. We are just figuring out how to return to what we had begun last fall. Many of us feel, rightly, as though we have been in the wilderness for 2 years, And yet here we are at the gates of Lent, ready to enter perhaps a different kind of wilderness, one which we hope will provide learning and growth and even joy along the journey. We also know that we don't have ashes and certainly don't want to touch people and impose those ashes because we are trying to be as responsible as possible. And so I would invite you to think about the message that is often provided during Ash Wednesday. From dust we came, and to dust we shall return. We are, after all, creatures of the earth, created from the earth. And it is to earth that we shall return. It is to earth that we give gratitude and thanks for providing us with more than what we need, with an abundance of gifts. We give thanks to the maker of heaven and earth, as the psalmist says, for the grace that continues to provide us with opportunities to be present for one another and to others who are in need. I hope and I pray that this time together will help us to mark this day, which is the beginning of Lent, as a time of journey in the wilderness, but also a return to earth. The word humility comes from humus, meaning earth, and so when we humble ourselves and we embark on this journey of Lent, perhaps some of us are even taking up a discipline for the month ahead, we are reconnecting with our source. And perhaps we can reframe our Lenten journey this year with that. We are returning to our source in the hopes that we would be empowered to carry out the fast that God requires, and which I will now read about in the words of the prophet Isaiah. I am reading from the New Revised Standard Version, chapter 58 of the prophet Isaiah, verses 1 through 12. Shout out, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their rebellion, to the house of Jacob their sins. Yet day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God. Why do we fast, but you do not see? Why humble ourselves, but you do not notice? Look, you serve your own interest on your fast day and oppress all your workers. Look, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house, when you see the naked to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and God will say, Here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer your food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water, whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in. Here ends our reading. On Ash Wednesday, most people think of a somber time where we reflect on questions of mortality, maybe even, if we're good Calvinists, depravity. I'm not a good Calvinist, and so I'll avoid conversations around depravity today. But I was reminded of the significance of sharing and growing in our understanding of what this season means when I was driving Elijah to school earlier today. He asked about Lent, Ash Wednesday. We've observed it in our family, but he was curious about the origins, and I, of course, shared with him about Jesus' fasting for 40 days in the wilderness, the story from which we will read later on Sunday. And he said, "Oh, that's interesting. That sounds to me a lot like Ramadan." I said, "Yeah." I said, "In principle, right? It's fasting for spiritual growth. It's a kind of discipline that helps us to foster a connection to the holy. And actually, peoples all over the world have always engaged in a kind of fasting for the purpose of growth and connection." As we listen to the words from the prophet today, I was reminded of the significance of fasting. Not the kind of fasting that I might take up or that some of us have taken up in the past. the discipline of letting go of one thing that you may really want for the season of Lent, but the fasting from injustice, fasting from placing burdens on others, fasting perhaps from saying yes to everything and everyone. There's always a kind of fast that will help us to reconnect with our source of strength and with our connection to what means the most, not only in our lives, but in the lives of all people. That source of hope and faith and life. This season, as we embark on our journey together, I would invite us to consider what it means for us to be a part of a species that, for as long as we know, has engaged in some form of fasting. And moreover, what kind of fasting are we called to engage in this year? What are we called to let go of, if for a season, so that we might connect with who we are, really, down deep, and who God is, who the Holy is, what that means for us? What would it mean for us to fast from certain practices and habits that do not edify us and that do not edify our world? I would like us to take this time today to consider the fast that we are called to undertake during this season of Lent. Amen. Friends, you have listened to music to accompany the silence of this time. You've heard the words of the prophet. You've heard a bit of my reflection. And now I would like to offer the blessing as you go forth on your journey. Just as Jesus was accompanied into the wilderness by the Spirit, so are we accompanied by the divine. We don't get to escape the wilderness. We have to enter it. But we don't go anywhere alone. And it's important to remember that as we undertake our fast this Lenten season. So I offer you the blessing that we say each Sunday. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, in the wilderness and beyond, God is. Amen.